Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Unmuted, the podcast by Big Karma. Big Karma makes video games with stealth learning and about a very inclusive class. If you want to hear more about us and join our community, there's a Patreon for that, patreon.com/Big Karma. And on our podcast, we talk about the secret sauce of all entertainment industries, how the stuff we love is made. And my fantastic guest today is the man with a hat himself. I so appreciate that you wearing your hat for my show.
Well, I had to. It's the kind of whole sort of identity that I have to kind of make sure that people can recognize me at conferences, so it's become a thing.
Right.
And you would have told me off if I didn't wear it.
Yeah, I would have been offended actually, because you wear your hat for serious shows. So Oscar Clark with me today from Fundamentally Games. Many of you know him as the man in the hat from all the conferences all over the world and panels. Thank you so much for joining me today, Oscar.
Pleasure. Always fun.
So I met you as the man with the hat. In so many conferences, Helsinki, London, and we've been talking about you were with Unity at the time. Mm-hmm. Let's go back in time, though.
Now, but yeah,
because we are old men, as we found out, as we became friends.
This used to be orange a long time ago. Yeah,
this used to be long. This used to be long. I should wear hats too. Yeah. I should wear hats too. You started, so back when I was in China in factories shipping stuff over the internet because it was a new thing. You were at the very birth of mobile gaming back when nobody was taking it seriously, right?
Yeah. I mean, actually, we actually started in games, I think, about the same time, like 1998.
Bingo.
So
exactly the same time.
I was involved with dial-up modem-based gaming platform. So I was involved with Wireplay, which is the second online gaming platform in the world by 1 week. The M-Player, which was the US-based one, just happened to get out a week before the one I ended up working on. I didn't start for a year or so after it launched, but I ended up running this. So imagine this, right? You're playing PC games on a dial-up modem, which is like I think 28K board, which is like ridiculous compared to like the gigabit connections some people have nowadays.
I wish I had a soundboard to say. That was the exactly, and it was costing a lot of money. I remember my second month on the internet at home, because at first I was on the library of the university using it and finding out that I can import stuff from Hong Kong. And then when I got it from home, the second month, I think I paid 1,500 euro, which for a student was bankruptcy.
I know. Well, so because I am old, I actually had an Apple IIe in 1984 with a dial-up modem, a 96 board, so 9600 board dial-up modem, which I was the only person I knew who had one. So you got Matthew Broderick on the in the cinema with War Games going on around the same kind of time, and I'm sitting there with almost the same kit, not quite, but and I'm going, oh, I've got an Apple IIe, and it was amazing because there was no World Wide Web. It was bulletin boards, and I used to go on. I still have
the BBS.
The BBS. So I still have in my loft Prestel. So that's British Telecom's directory. It was like a telephone book. It was really thin, but it was a telephone book with all of the BBS materials. And the fascinating thing about that for me is that was the birth of the hyperlink. Prestel was the very first. So all this is, we click on link. That came from BBS, a particularly British Telecom's BBS. And I remember when 10 years, no, more than that, 14 years later, when I ended up working at British Telecom, on their gaming service, in the team that ran their internet services, we were having debates about whether we charged a royalty on the use of a hyperlink. Can you imagine that? Serious conversations about actually charging people for using a hyperlink.
From the people who were charging us a lot of money for SMS at the time.
Oh yeah, exactly. Those phone bills that you were complaining at. Ta-da! Yeah. Anyway, so interesting time.
The statutes of limitations have passed, so I might as well admit to something from my piracy past. So I was using backup stations on Super Famicom, Super Nintendo.
Yeah.
My first piracy days were on Commodore Amiga. The floppy disks. It was
I couldn't
not
comment
even
on the grounds it might incriminate me.
Okay, but back then, let's put it in perspective. I don't think anybody in my high school had original games. Piracy was the norm on Commodore Amiga. And then the Super Nintendo came about and you had backup stations, but to get the latest games, you had to pass them from one hacker to another on the BBS through modem phones, and a 16 megabyte games like Street Fighter 2 was taking 24 hours to download over the phone.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It was so expensive that a friend of mine in Paris started to have the hookup about stolen AT&T cards, because we could have them for a fraction of the price, and that person ended up going to jail and then came back out of jail and started a website. But it was it was a completely different time.
Piracy. Yeah, I understand. I'm not going to condone piracy, but there's an awful lot that we learned through people's behavior. Like, for example, the early phone hackers that were able to use tapping mechanisms to be able to trigger phone calls by tapping into the codes that the engineers had. And that was some of the earliest hacking there was. And also, if we hadn't learned about that, some of the techniques that we then later rely on to deliver games wouldn't have been possible. I think things particularly like, if we're talking about movie or audio piracy, there was actually some behaviors in terms of user experience that would, Spotify wouldn't exist if we hadn't gone through an era where we explored that it was better to play, to play a track, play some audio that way. So I think
I use Napster suing MP3.
Yeah. Well, I was actually at RealNetworks in 2000, and we were a part of dealing with streaming audio. So RealNetworks was the primary tool. Real Player Jukebox was the primary tool to take your CD and put it into digital format. So I was in that scene. Yeah, it was massive. And I remember some of the first, I think it was the Diamond Reel or Diamond Reel.
The first MP3 player.
The first MP3 player. So we did loads of work with them. And actually, I remember an in-car Diamond Rio, I think it was Diamond Rio, but an in-car MP3 player that had like 80 gig hard drive. And we were so excited. It's like, oh my God. But if you think about it, the Diamond Rio had a few meg. In terms of, actually, maybe it was a bit more than that, but it wasn't a lot of memory. But it did transform the way we consume content. I think
it led to an iPod. It led to the iPod. Of
course it did.
And it's interesting what you say about the time, because it was so innovative that at Lixang, we made a product. So I was at Lixang.com at the time in Hong Kong, and we were a retailer shipping pretty much anything that comes out in Japan or China. We were shipping it to the world, if it was video games or electronics. And at the time, we noticed that people did not understand the MP3 Rio because they could not hold physically the product anymore. And so we manufactured in China a transitional product that today sounds absurd, an MP3 Discman. The MP3 Superstar was a Discman so that you can burn your CDs with 5,000 songs because you're used to it. So it was,
Yeah,
and
no,
we
I get it.
sold thousands of them.
I bet
And
you
we were on the
did.
mp3.com newsletter that Christmas, and it really was selling easier for us for a year
Yeah,
than the Rio, because we didn't have to explain what it was and how it works. And
exactly.
that's fascinating because, now we live in other times of innovation, and you see the same resistance to change, right? That it's what? And it's cryptocurrency, and I cannot touch
Yeah.
it, and there is
Oh,
no
it's
node, and
exactly
there
the
is
same.
no bank.
Well, you talked about mobile. So I joined 3 after I was at Real.
Right.
So 3 was one of the earliest pure 3G operators in the UK. There was a bidding process in the UK for the 3G bandwidth. So 3 wasn't called 3 at the time; it was called Hutchison 3G. It was part of the Hutchison One Power Group,
Owned from Hong Kong, right? The owners were
owned from
from
Hong
Hong
Kong.
Kong. It was all over
Exactly
the
why I
news. I was
mentioned it.
living in Hong Kong at Lixang, and
You
it
were
was
living in Hong
all over the
Kong.
news. It was the pride of the nation.
Yeah, and Li Kaoxing, I think at the time was the richest person in Asia or something ridiculous.
Correct. And
The
in
result
the top
of
10 of the world. In the top
oh
10 of
yeah,
the
he was in
world.
the top 10. I think by his investment in 3, he has ended up as being like the 10th richest instead. But that's a different subject. But it's a fascinating experience to be in there in the earliest days. And I was I started off doing sort of marketing community stuff, as in designing what would a community experience around games look like on a mobile phone. And I very quickly ended up running the thing. But we did stuff that you didn't imagine at the time, like who'd want to do an in-app purchase? Well, we built the first mobile in-app purchase. The only trouble is, this is the sort of secret sauce. The only trouble is that the APK, so that's kind of the bit that lets you do the bidding, that was something like 6K, not big, but some of the devices had a maximum of 21K, and we were taking up 6K of it just for the billing bit. So it was a ridiculous thing. It was actually a disaster. So we were renting games for 50p for 3 plays, and it was a disaster because not enough developers could make enough games. And I didn't know what we found later, which was really fascinating, is games that had the rent and then we could sell them sold about 3 times as many, just by the fact that it had variable pricing. So we actually learned some of the very, very important stuff about what makes modern day mobile games work so well by being the first people to do it back in 2003. And this is when I kind of first came across one of your former companies, a certain bird-related entity now, but at the time, Rovio weren't. Rovio weren't there. They were doing work higher. In fact, I think we originally went via a Player X, I think it was at the time, who. But I think I was the first person to launch the first proper. I think technically it was the second Rovio game, but I think it was the first branded Rovio game, which is called Darkest Fear. So the Darkest Fear was the first game, and I think I was the first person to put that live, and I was a massive fan of it at the time. So so I've got a long history of being the guy at the early days, and we were I like to think this is true. I have some data that presents it, but essentially we were the highest revenue per user in the world on Java. Bear in mind, Java is tiny compared to everything else, but we had this advantage that we were pure 3G, and we'd managed to get the company to build into your subscription a games payment. So it meant that we were able to get more revenue per user at the time than any other operator. And in terms of European ones, I know for sure the UK ones, we were like 9 times the revenue per user of, say, Rovio. No, sorry, Vodafone. I meant to say Vodafone. I got Rovio on my head. But 9 times the revenue of another operator in the UK per user is just brilliant. And I hugely proud of what we did there. But it came out of giving, actually caring about games and actually thinking about game retail.
And it's interesting because that time in history was pre-Apple App Store, obviously pre-Google Play and Android. But it's as I was talking about it again on the last episode with Peter Vestabaka, we got into that.
Yeah.
That before Angry Birds,
Good old Peter.
Rovio made 51 work for
Yeah.
hire games. RealNetworks, I remember, was one. Free. And
Yeah.
he did some stuff for Nokia, for the neighbors at Nokia, obviously,
They
the
did.
Engage and all that. And
Well, let's face it, half the staff were from Nokia at the time.
yes, but none of it was nowhere near as successful as Angry Birds or anything that came post 2008. But what I find fascinating,
is actually was quite successful, and actually, from my understanding, and from my understanding is that that's what allowed them. Well, that's one of the things that allowed them to do the next few games, because they had actually got some income from that particular game. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you.
That's exactly how Mika Head and Nicholas Head remember it. That these work for hire games kept them alive.
Yeah.
It was just difficult to crack a hit that would allow you to think a little bit more comfortably. And it was always next gig, up until Angry Birds. But that's precisely my point, that this prehistoric ecosystem gave all these studios that you hear are successful today, either on another name, under another name, or as a different entity sometimes, but they were preparing during these years, and you gave them a means to pay the bills, so that when the tide really lifted, they were still alive and much better prepared than all the studios that moved from console PC to mobile and had so much to learn.
No, exactly. And I mean, like I say, it's not me giving them the money. It's that we had the ecosystem. I'd love to say it was me. God, dear. I mean, we had to come around to Ilka or Kristian to say, hey, it was me. Give me all your money because I gave, I mean, the fact is that you had these amazing people, obviously Ilka, Digital Chocolate back in the day, Kristian, Segerstrale, Macrospace. And the list goes on. There are countless people, and I'm going to get people throwing stones at me because saying, "Oh, why didn't you mention me?" There are thousands of people I know from that era still to this day. And I'm not entirely exaggerating there either. I mean, it is literally hundreds of people, possibly thousands. And what they did is they learned what was different about a mobile device. And there's an intrinsic difference in terms of pace, about iteration, about experience, about immediacy that we all learned on that earliest days. And I think it's a real privilege to have been in that era and to have people still. So I will still occasionally get a hug from Ilka at a conference, or I'll get Kristian Segerstrale saying nice things, or Andrew Stalbow, who obviously we both know. When you see these amazing people who've done really, really well. Andrew is a fantastic example. I think I've mentioned this to you before, where Andrew actually worked with me in the very earliest days of 3, where he did all the contracts. So he basically did all the negotiations with the likes of Rovio. Well, actually, he didn't do Rovio because they went via a third party, but he set up a lot of the contracts. He did a whole bunch of stuff around the Premiership football agreement that 3 had at the time as well, I think. The fact that he ended up in games at all baffles me, because he was never a games person, but he ended up being a part of Rovio, ended up being part of, Seriously, amazing guy.
Before so the transition is first 20th Century Fox. Then he works on Avatar, Simpsons, Stop Out, he touched a little bit. And it's
of course, there's another example
for the launch of Rio that there's this tie-in with Angry Birds Rio, and the numbers when they do the surveys at the exit of the movies, why did you come and how did you hear about the movie? 90% it was through Angry Birds Rio. And he started realizing the power of mobile games at that moment, and he jumped into it. But I gotta tell you, as the CEO of Seriously, which is how I got to know him better. I didn't know him much during his Angry Birds time, only by reputation. No. But when I served for Seriously, what was fascinating about his character was how he was talking much differently than all the other bosses I had. Because all the other bosses, they were talking about ARPU, ARPDAO, all these acronyms that all microcosm use every day. And he was going back to things like the 3C of family entertainment brand. characters, comedy, community. We need a
Yeah.
writer. Let's hire from The Simpsons. We need a
Yes.
story Bible. You know, he was thinking, and he was pitching also like a Hollywood guy who had opened his eyes about the power of gaming. And as a gaming guy, I loved that because he was opening my eyes about things that I was too close from the material, such as, you think making a mobile game is expensive, Pascal? For $1 or $2 million, you can start building your character-centric IP, offer it directly to consumers, 24/7, direct engagements with millions, and building a brand that can lead to animation, merchandise, and maybe a movie later.
Oh, absolutely.
You doing Hollywood in reverse. When I was at Hollywood, I had to pay $100 million for the movie and then another $200 million in 3 weeks marketing launch and cross my fingers. And looking at it like that, I was like, I'm in the best entertainment business ever.
Oh, and when Andrew was at Fox, I mean, the amount of push he gave me for Family Guy stuff at the time, where Family Guy just dropped off, and I think it'd been canned, but then it got brought back by audience demand. I don't know if the mobile game had a part to play in that or not, but I remember he was very, very keen on us taking that one. But you're right. I mean, it's just. But what I think this says is there are some amazing individuals who cut their teeth in the earliest days, and I go back to Kristian. Well, actually, I mean, any of these. I mean, Stuart, who was involved with one of the original people behind Simpsons Tapped Out. Again, amazing guy. I knew him in the early days. He actually produced a bunch of games which were not very good before he then produced Simpsons Tapped Out, which was amazing. But it was interesting if you go back to the earliest days. Actually, not very good. That's not fair. They were good, but they were really quirky. They were actually a lot of fun. And I think that ability to do quirky and fun when it was applied to a relatively mainstream brand was just like gold dust. Anyway, the point for me I was trying to get to is that these amazing people who learned and really were visionary early on because they could see how the new platform would create a brand new ocean, a brand new space to explore. And again, serial examples of that are people like Kristian and Ilka. So Kristian Segerstrale, when he came out of a conference, I met him at a conference, Mobile Game Forum in London, 2007. Right, they just come out of Facebook announcing social games. Kristian's going to me, Oscar, you've got to do this social game stuff. It's this, it's that, it's amazing. Next thing I know, he'd set up Playfish. Next thing I know, Playfish was bought for X 100 million. Next thing I know, he'd cashed out. Amazing, absolutely amazing. Obviously, when you look at things like, the way Digital Chocolate got bought out, well, not bought out, but
yeah.
So I've forgotten the name. I think it was Sumia. Was bought by Digital Chocolate. So obviously Ilka and the team there, and there are a whole bunch of other. I'm not mentioning. It's so easy to mention the names of people everybody knows. It's difficult to mention everybody. We'll just be here forever otherwise. But it was fascinating sort of seeing how that company grew and evolved and started changing its strategy and started growing and growing and growing as Java games transitioned into mobile games. But then when you see the way they set up Supercell, and particularly what I find fascinating about that is the 2011 talk at GDC that Ilka gave, where he was really upfront about how they'd failed making Gunshine on as a social game, as a Facebook era game, which was perfectly timed because that was the end of the Facebook social game kind of boot bonanza. I'm sure there are still people making money on those games, but not to the same extent, or not to the excitement and hype that it was. And Ilka would turn around and say, we failed because of this, we failed because of this, we failed because of this, we failed because of this. And we're okay with that because we're now going to do this. And the this was Heyday. And the this was Clash of Clans.
On iPad, I think, right?
Yeah. On iPad.
And everybody was doubting them and laughing them like, iPad, only 1 million people have an iPad. What are you talking about?
And they were going tablet first. And they were right. And as it happens, history has moved on since then. And we've gone from having these big devices to actually making our handheld device, the phone, bigger. I think tablets still have a place, but
Don't
they
get me
haven't
started
evolved.
about that. Don't get me started
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the key thing for me was this was a company, this was a mindset that came out of the struggle that we'd all gone through in those Java days, where we had to rethink the way we looked at games. We had to rethink what they meant. And I think the fact that we've gone through that struggle, we've had that hardening process. And no wonder the industry has now expanded to such an extent that mobile is, not quite, but almost half of the total games industry. That to me is astounding. We were laughed at in 2003 for doing games on phones. We were told it would never work. By the way, the same people said you'd never put a camera on a phone. Seriously,
Yeah,
I had people telling me, no, put cameras on phones. That won't work.
And the same people laughed at Steam in 2005. Who is going to download games for PC? Are you crazy? And,
I have a little
just from
story
Valve,
about that.
a little indie
Yeah.
studio, which is not even EA or Nintendo. Are you guys crazy? And look at where Steam is today.
The funny thing for me about the Steam one is I remember, now I maybe I'm misremembering it. I am old after all. But I remember being at Remember RealNetworks, streaming video? That was the thing. We were having conversations with a certain company to stream games in 2000. Guess who that company ended up being? Steam.
Oh.
So Steam, I believe, was originally conceived, or at least there was definitely a conversation going on about streaming games, not just downloading them. And I think if you think about that, obviously way too early, more than 20 years too early, probably.
It was too expensive in bandwidth.
It was too
expensive in bandwidth. Yeah. Many people forget that today, but when Google Video was successful in Japan, and YouTube was the small pirate platform from a couple of guys from home, was kicking their ass in the rest of the world.
Yeah.
And when Google acquired YouTube for $1 billion, many doubts started to emerge. Some people were saying, but what about the piracy content? What are they going to do? On that point, I was like, they'll figure it out. They'll do ad revenue like they did on Google. But the big deal for me was, oh my God, it costs so much money in servers to stream those videos. This is a loss leader. But then over a couple of years, it actually became a business strategic advantage for Google, because it started negotiating its traffic and its servers and its bandwidth at such a high level that not only they got a better price for YouTube and a better cost structure, but it started benefiting all the other entities of Google, which we are now working on the future on the internet for Gmail and Google Calendar and everything else.
Yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating because I wasn't there, but I was in other companies that were doing very similar conversations. I mean, so at my time at 3, I didn't just do games. I was looking at movies. I did the first design for wallpapers and ringtunes. Do you remember when that was the big commercial thing? So I did the first design for that platform. I even spent some time looking after music. Not very long, but in fact, actually, my work was dumped because they came up with a really good idea. Music companies don't care about the videos. That's promotional. It was actually a lot cheaper to show a music video than it was to share the track, which sounds crazy nowadays because you're still hearing the track.
Yeah.
But we could actually sell, we were selling videos for like 50p per view. And it's like amazing. I mean, you'd never think about that now, but the track Crazy, I think you're crazy.
Niles Barkley. I remember that one.
That was the first #1 that was driven in the UK, that was driven by downloads.
Wasn't it even controversial that the music industry were like, this doesn't count as a true sale?
really annoyed with it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
You're rigging the charts.
we're ringing it. Yeah, exactly. And I think, and we at 3 had a lot to do that, I believe. Anyway, so I didn't have responsibility then. I just had a little window with music. I just think it's interesting. I
Yes.
even dabbled with gambling at the time, but I think what was really fascinating about that is really the movie trailer one was most interesting for me, because I think when you're talking about wider, implementation of kind of video and engaging content in general via mobile devices, the movie trailer actually turned out to be really quite good, but we were charging 50p for, to watch the thing. Not great. So that was the first product we made as a purely ad funded. And so we got 118, which is one of these kind of like directory inquiries companies. They were the first sponsor. And so they sponsored it. We had a 35-fold increase in usage. And that company had a 7% increase in total call volume. It was a phenomenal success. So we made 100 times what we were, well, maybe not 100 times, but we made a significant increase in revenue as a direct result of just making something free.
Early adopting new platforms and new business models, which is the point I was getting at, that if you get into the ecosystem early, I had that luck on the internet, they had that luck on mobile. Yeah, maybe the early years, because innovation is tough to sell and it's hard to convince investors and your audience might be limited. But when suddenly the world changed and the tide rise, your boat goes lifted so high and you're prepared for it. And I've seen that with all the companies. As a marketing guy, I've seen it with the first companies who adopted Google Ads in 2003, then the first companies who adopted Facebook Ads when it came out, the first companies that took social media communication seriously, then the first companies that got into YouTube and influencers, the first companies that got into China. The first year you feel lonely and it's hard and it's a wild west and everything seems chaotic, but then all of a sudden you figure it out. And when the big companies enter and still scratching their heads, you already build the bridge, and either you can charge a toll or you can discover those things. That I've had those moments as well when you try something new. TikTok the last couple of years. You try something and you're like, oh, hopefully it works, and then boom, hockey stick in your analytics, and you're like, oh, it did work, and I'm going to do it again.
But for every success story, there are failures, and it's brutal being on the bleeding edge. I mean, my career basically I could describe as a litany of failures, but also I could describe it as the most incredible experience of learning about what does work that you could hope for. One of the things I thought was really interesting back in the day, RealNetworks again. I don't know why I'm talking about RealNetworks a lot. It's just that there's some interesting stuff that came out that year I was there. Rob Glazer, who's the CEO there at the time, I think he still is, who was a founder anyway. He said to me, "Never bet against the internet." So, I mean, the reason he said that was it was all to do with, there were lots of people talking about, putting MP3s on discs, or physical goods that would be sold. And even now, if you think about it, we're still buying physical discs for consoles. We're still buying physical hardware that's dedicated to gaming. I mean, there's questions about that. They're getting less and less about the hardware and more about the DRM, I would argue. What is a PlayStation 5? Is it a specific device, or is it basically a flavor of PC? You decide. I'm not criticizing that there are devices we call consoles, merely that their role has changed.
Correct.
And essentially, we don't do the physical media anymore because it's so much more convenient, so much more effective to deliver it digitally. And what can you do if you do it digitally? You can update it. You can update it to make it better. Well, you can also update it to make it worse, but that's a different subject. We won't go on about, how many times we used to have to restart our Windows desktop or our, download the latest update for your console. I know that gets tedious, But we're getting to a stage now where we're smarter about that. We can be, basically, we're looking at experiences as services, not just as packaged product. And I think that's really fascinating. In fact, I've always have. If only someone wrote a book on the topic. Oh wait, I did.
Yeah, you might as well plug the title for it so that they can search for it and you sell a few 50 copies.
Yeah, so games as a service. I've actually started to. We're actually working with one of my guy on my team. He and I started recording a conversation about the book. We're going chapter by chapter, and hopefully we'll pull together basically a podcast series, just talking about where has the games come from since I wrote the book. So it'll be interesting. Hopefully interesting. We'll see if anyone's interested in it later.
For me, the moment where I realized free to play is winning and there's no turning back, it was at GDC 2012.
Yeah.
And everybody, I was pitching a couple of premium games that were already doing fine, and I was pitching them to Korean distributors, to iDream Sky in China, and then to other people who mattered in the US and Europe. And I left the room depressed because it was clear to me that nobody wanted premium games anymore.
No.
Clash of Clans had changed the world over a year, and free to play was what you were supposed to do.
But you're a late starter though.
Yes, correct.
2008.
That's why I left the GDC depressed, because I had premium games in my pocket, and I was like,
exactly.
damn it, I'm too late with my product.
Yeah.
But I should have done. And also, I tried to convince. I'm not going to name him, but I tried to convince the designer of one of the games, because the game was really, really, really great, and there was a way to make it free to play. Yeah. And he was somehow offended by that. And he said, no, my game is a holistic experience. I don't want to rape it with microtransactions.
No.
And that's why I left the GDC depressed, because contractually, he had the rights to say no. And I was like, so I have this great game, and it just has this one tiny thing that makes it not fit for the current market, and he doesn't want to do it. That's it. That game is going to flop. And
we still have this argument with some developers that we still haven't convinced people. And in fact, in some ways, it's got worse. I mean, I don't know. We saw the other day the temporary posting of a comment from some Chinese government official about the spiritual corruption of games, which was not ideal. So we still have this problem. But at the same time, we've also got some bad actors that have delivered games which are essentially just strip mining players, which are terrifying. It really upsets me. Like I say, I got lucky because PlayStation Home was technically the first full free-to-play experience. Here was a virtual world. This was the first metaverse. Well, no, Second Life, arguably. Oh no, but beyond before that. Wireplay was the thing I did. It may not have had avatars, but it was an online experience. Anyway, let's not worry about which is the first metaverse. Let's
worry about which one is the last.
Yeah, the last. I'm currently betting on Roblox, but I think it's a bit more. There's a bit more Roblox to go there.
I love Roblox for the kids because it teaches them really early age to think as designers and as developers, and what this is going to do in terms of creativity for the entertainment industries in 10 years from now. Oh man, I'm excited about that.
But I think it's not just for kids. I think it's changed completely in terms of its mindset, and I think that will be their barrier to them really taking over the world for real. But in my opinion, I mean, what do I know? But it is something that I think may hold them back a little. It gives somebody else an opportunity to step in potentially, but at the moment they're the only ones who really got an ecosystem working. But their ecosystem there are problems with that economic charging structure because of the inherent nature of app store pricing and so on and so forth. Will we see that change? I don't know. But it was fascinating being a PlayStation running this virtual world, because we didn't have to worry about what percentage of revenue was going to the platform because we were the platform. We didn't have to worry. We were managing, bringing an ecosystem of professionalized content into a virtualized world. Now, did we do it perfectly? No, but we got to learn so much about what a virtual community looks like, and things like, how often do you think about the architectural design of a space, in the sense that, think about a supermarket, or a shopping mall, a big American shopping mall. Okay, think about the flow of how people work their way through. That's navigation.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's UX. That's actually your UX. Your UX is no longer just, have I got some pretty boxes and flow them and click on buttons? No, your UX is, how do they flow through a space?
Yep. And
That's
show them the expensive stuff first.
Yeah. Oh,
it's not an accident that the expensive stuff is at the entrance.
Learn about IKEA. IKEA is an amazing, testament to architectural UX. And so I think this is what I think is so fascinating, is that not only did we have to think about pricing strategies, not only did we think about how we have an ecosystem for a development environment, but we also have to think about virtualized experiences and how you can tell stories, that create spaces that allow players to tell their own stories. The Star Wars Cantina we had, there was a bunch of people who were basically taking screen grabs and creating comic books out of the screen grabs they got from PlayStation Home.
Yeah.
Because where else could you have Alien and Stormtroopers in the same space?
That user-generated content generation that's really what I love the most about the internet generation. The modding, the way they reuse things in a way we didn't think about. That's what I love the most about creativity. When you give the means to the masses, it's like in 1977 when there was this very hot summer in New York, and there was a power outage in August for 3 days. New York was without electricity, and nobody got hurt, nobody got killed, because the people were so busy rioting and looting. No, not rioting. Sorry, that's my French going in. Looting. So taking stuff out of the stores. 10,000 turntables got stolen within 2 days. 3 months later, we had hip hop, rap, Smurfs. Give the technology to the poor and to the masses, and they will invent stuff because they're hungry. And that's what I love about the internet. We're democratizing. And of course, we're going to get a shit stream of stupidity on social media. But we're also going to have this kid in a lost village with very poor upbringing, and somehow, someday, he's going to get his hands on a mobile phone and do something that's going to change the world. Yeah. I might sound a little bit idealist here, but I believe in the chaos theory. The more chaos there is, inspiration will emerge.
No, completely get it. And I think it's like, there's so many fascinating kind of angles and takes on it. So this is another example. Right? So people talk about Fortnite and how we've had people like Marshmallow and various others doing, I've forgotten the name of the latest one that did it. Think about this, right?
Balvin.
Yeah, exactly. So
I'm doing this episode from Colombia. I might as well drop the name J Balvin,
Do it.
Hepa Colombia.
So think about this, like more than 10 years before that, in the SingStar space in PlayStation Home, Dizzy Rascal launched one of his albums. So you think about that, we've had this era where we've already done a lot of this stuff, that is now being hailed as the big thing. We were just 10 years too early. Well, maybe not just, there's other issues, but, we were at least 10 years too early. But I think the experiments that we learn, the testament, is very similar to the testaments of the stuff that we learned in the mobile days. And actually, I would argue the testament to the experiences we learned doing the dial-up modem days. For example, for me, we were heavily involved in Counter-Strike. I I like to make this joke that I saved Counter-Strike. And I technically kind of did, allegedly, because I gave them like a check for some computers. They ran out of money. We bought them some new computers. They then got bought by Valve. Result happiness. 3 of my guys got their names in the credits, but I didn't. They didn't want to tell me they only could get 3 names in. And they told me 10 years. My mate, Adrian, told me 10 years later that I'd missed out on getting the credits by that much. So annoying. But that is an example of like a game that, and the reason I just like making that story up. But the reason I like that story is that here is a game, Counter-Strike, that is still being played today. The design style, the design structures of that game, that method of intensity, relief and discussion, intensity, relief, discussion, planning, intensity, that has become a model for some of the most incredible experiences that we still have today. You know, World of Tanks is Counter-Strike for old people. That's kind of my joking description of it. You know, but it's just an example of how, you know, if we start thinking about the psychology of play, about how that we can create and enable and empower people to have that escape and that sense of competence and the kind of the collection, you know, and the social capital of play, it's an incredibly powerful medium, one which, you know, just takes us along in the stream and can tell stories in ways that no other medium can. It's the only medium that's a verb.
And you say tell stories.
Yeah.
It's almost that video games offers us a sandbox to tell our own stories through interaction and trial and error, that embracing a failure, because that's how we learn. That's true for entrepreneurs, but gaming is also giving us that in the playground. It's like a mini digital playground where we can fail something and then try again and learn something through trial and error, which is the argument I always make. I keep saying when people say, oh, look at the growth of video games last year. I'm like, yeah, the growth of video games last year has been the story of the year every year for the last 43 years.
Oh, exactly.
And it's because it's interactive. It has that thing that other passive media don't have. It's like when I was a kid, I was more enamored by the stories I was building with my Star Wars toys and my neighbor in his attic than the movies themselves. Because the stories we would build would be epic sagas over a year and a half.
Yeah. And they'd be crazy and stupid, but it's ours.
Yes, but it was my story. It was my sandbox. It's that Lego has that as well. And video games today have that really in abundance. Every now and then you have that AAA linear story where you play through, and these are great games. But more and more games today, you mentioned Roblox. Is it even a game? It's really about the creativity within creativity, you and expressing yourself.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Exactly. And actually, I get really frustrated with some games, particularly the AAA linear ones. There is a particular one which I think, you know, so let's be fair, Last of Us, right? One of the best games of all time, and yet one I deeply hate simultaneously as I love it. I almost hate it as much as I love it. And there are 2 reasons why I find it frustrating. And by the way, this is no reflection on the team. I did an amazing job, and
everybody loves Naughty Dog.
I dream of making a game even a tenth of this.
Yeah.
But there are 2 things that annoy me. One, when I stealth kill someone, I get no ammo. When I shoot them, I get ammo. Where did the ammo go? And it's like, I know they want to have a balancing act in there so that you kind of create scarcity, but it's so counterintuitive in terms of the experience that it really just wound me up throughout playing. So that's me being me. Fine. Ignore as you wish. But the other one was, there's a particular moment, and everyone knows that moment, where I had felt I had agency through the game. I know I didn't really, but I felt like I had agency through the game. And then came the moment of the real decision in the game. and I was not allowed to do what I wanted to do. I was made to do what the character wanted to do, and I deeply and profoundly disagreed with that choice. And that's the point where all illusion of me being part of a narrative went. And I felt like I'm gonna plagiarize Yoda. Do or do not. There is no show. So don't show and tell me. Let me choose in a game. And I know that's difficult. I don't think, but I think if you disregard the player's choice, particularly in Amazing Game, what you do is you just cut away the emotional commitment to the game.
That moment basically was you getting out of the magic universe and seeing the trick. And if you've seen the trick, you can't immerse yourself back into the magic universe because it's not.
Now, I don't mind that sometimes. In fact, as I think that's the difference between a game designer and a game player. I want to work the trick out because I want to be. In fact, I love magic generally, and I wish I could do this better. I want to be able to sort of take the kind of card and essentially he says it's disappeared and then it's back. I can't really do it very well because I'm not a very good magician. Because you can just see the trick. So that is what I felt Naughty did. He says, dropping the card. I'll get better. But the point for me is that that's no fun. It's no fun watching someone practice in front of you. Now, I'm not saying Naughty were practicing. Don't get me wrong. It's an amazing game. I'm going to say it again. It's an amazing game. I do love it, except they did something I didn't like. They did two things I didn't like. And that's a personal, subjective view.
Right.
But I see other designers following their trick. And I think we see that the result is that we end up with people not pushing the boundaries of what games can do. I love it when you see a game like Papers, Please, or a few others more recent than that. Look at something like Among Us, where you start seeing just a slightly different twist on a standard way of playing. Even Fall Guys, there's like different slight twists on things. Now, they're not narrative example, Papers, Pleases, but those other two aren't. It doesn't have to be literal narrative. It can be personal narrative, personal experience. I think thinking about action, thinking about personal experience really matters. And that doesn't go away with a free-to-play game.
And this
in fact, in some ways, I would argue that we need to be better at that.
Yes, this resonates particularly with me, what you're saying, because we at Big Karma are trying to do something very original with original people who look different than what you would see in regular video game heroes and have been ignored by society for long. And we find the coolness and the fun in it. And it's really refreshing to take what we know and our best practices and the tricks we know, but to apply it to a new theme and a new story. And I often say that actually as an advice, as a marketing guy to many people, if you just clone what somebody else cloned yesterday and what was the success of last Christmas, then you're entering in a rat race and you're not delivering. You might make some money, but you're not going to find your blue ocean. And that's a pity. And we've talked about that. We've talked about that at some conferences, you and me, when we were going into, but is the A/B testing data-driven of things? I actually will quote Robin Squire here. If you A/B test the best album cover for Nirvana, it's unlikely you're going to come up with a baby in a pool chasing a dollar bill. And yet it's one of the most iconic covers of all time. And you and I share that sentiment that, yeah, data is great, A/B testing is great, but you still need to ignite the spark. You still need to create something. And it's a pity when we just copy and clone each other, because now that we have 2.5 billion people playing games, we could make games about anything and everything.
The whole idea of the testing, looking at the creativity and A/B testing, that to me is fundamental. And what I think is really fascinating is how much I've learned in the most recent kind of new era of games, the hyper casual mobile experience. What I think's really fascinating about hyper casual, I know not everyone's a huge fan, lots of ads, all that kind of stuff, but actually what's fascinating for me is the way that it's changed the way we make games. So what under the bonnet of a hyper casual game is the fact that they can produce an idea very quickly and then they can immediately test it. They do a Facebook ad or whatever and immediately understand if anyone cares, if anyone wants that game. So why would we spend all of our lives sitting there just like working away on games that are 2, 3, 5 years of spend of a massive team to make games when we can actually make a video very quickly at the beginning to see if anyone is interested in that game? And if we get that right, then we can do the next stage of testing. So we can do, what we're looking at is like maybe do a usability test online, using third-party companies to actually recruit people, so you don't have the bias of me asking you what you think of the game. And then we can work out a thing. One of my favorite bits of marketing is the Net Promoter Score, which is basically, would you recommend to a friend? Which is fascinating because it tells you that the person actually likes it. Because saying they like it, they're going to tell you they like it because they don't want to upset you. Yeah. Or, I mean, why would you? I mean, like, it was great. Yeah, get going now. But actually, if they tell you that they would recommend it to a friend, they're going to take a step back and they're actually going to say, would I? Because I'd be embarrassed if it was not really good. But maybe I'll say I would. Yeah, maybe. But the difference between saying maybe and giving it a mark out of 10. So if I get 7 or more, I really mean it. If I get less than 7, I probably don't. So this is the kind of thing I think we're finding really interesting. And then doing the same thing with beta testing. So scaling and testing and A/B testing, really important. So we looked at this as being, yeah, sure, you can do it hyper casual, but what if you could do that with living games? What if you break a game down into like its core mechanic, the context that keeps you playing, but then the meta game, the sort of social engagement and the kind of cultural fit and the device, the lifestyle fit of the game. And so if you break a game down,
or the new features that you're going to roll out in live ops.
Yeah. So why don't we start looking at this as rather than taking my opinion about games? I have the perfect opinion. Oh, yeah, right. But rather than taking my opinion, why don't we say, okay, design is a hypothesis. Let's test it, A/B test it. Let's work out if it works. And by taking away the emotion, by saying in advance, by using the scientific method to an extent, I mean, obviously a limited extent, but we're doing our best. We say, right, we think this game needs to get this in order to continue. If it doesn't get it, kill it. Move on. Now, what that means is we can then work with studios.
You said taking away the emotion. I would submit to you taking away your ego, because you're actually opening yourself, your empathy, to the emotions of others. I wouldn't say you're not. I wouldn't look at it dry robotically. I would look at it as these other people with their upbringing and their emotions see it differently. And I should let go of my ego. But I would challenge to you that entertainment is all about emotions. And if you remove the emotions, there is no more entertainment.
So never remove the emotions from the design and creativity stage, or the hypothesis stage. But you need to, I think, remove the emotions from the decision stage. That's kind of what I meant by it. So the reason I say emotions there is because it's, I think somebody, I know one of the people on a mentoring program I was talking to said it brilliantly. I've forgotten who it's a quote from, but basically, opinions strongly felt, loosely held. So being able to champion things that you believe in, but also be open to information, data. And I think that's really important. So I think it's so important that designers emotionally are connected to the concept and the creativity, and they believe in it and they engage in it and they care about it. But the truth can be uncomfortable. And so what we need to say is share this concept in a safe way where we know what we want to see out of it, and then see what other people who are not us think. And then when that comes in, and we need to take the emotion, because it's painful when someone tells you your darling doesn't work. It hurts. But if you say it's okay because I'm doing the smallest thing first before I get the feedback, then I can learn from that feedback and apply it to the next game and to the next game.
And it's, I would even put it as binary as kill it or release it. It can also be, maybe you need to tweak it. Maybe you need to tinker with it. Maybe it's not the right way to deliver it. The idea is good, but your execution is lacking. And
completely.
And you find out where, and they're churning out on day 2, when they click on this, you lose 20% of the audience. So that point is what you're doing wrong. How can you fix this?
The danger, and this is one, so we have a way through this. So Fundamental Games, what we're trying to do is find living games and help get them ready for release. And then we'll support those games in live. So we'll run live operations. But what we do at each of our launch readiness stages, we set what the KPI needs to be. So we've got a pass. Above that, great, rock and roll. We have a fail. Below that, we really can't afford to waste time. But then there's this middle ground. And that's the ground you're talking about. The reason we think there needs to be a fail level is because I guarantee you I can find a good reason why I could fix a game, no matter how bad it is. It's not a question of whether I could. It's a question of whether I should.
And whether you have the time to. Because...
Well, whether you should do it now. And what I find is really interesting is if you say it's a fail, you put it back in your pile of ideas. You don't kill it forever. You put it back. And that means that later on, when you're being creative, you think about things, you might pull out that thing that didn't work. And then with all of the other exercises you've done, you might now have a way of doing that does work.
Yes.
I'd rather...
It's a layer.
Space.
It's a layer into the idea. And that's really what experience taught me compared to the impatient fool that I was at the beginning of my career. Anything I would come up with and could not do within 6 months, I thought I had wasted my time. But then 10 years later, the idea would be revived into another idea. And you're absolutely right that there are things in our drawers that we get to dust off every now and then. And time is much slower than we think it is. We live in a fast industry, but at the same time, some things are extremely slow.
Well, I think it's a fast industry, but I think we repeat a lot of things. There's often a new opportunity to rethink or reframe something we've already done. One of the things I think most fascinating about live ops, actually, the thing that saved me as a product owner of living experiences, living platforms, is quite often there'd be a feature that I said must be done, but I couldn't convince other people. I couldn't, raise the funds for it, or whatever it might be. And it turned out that I would, in a living game, I can defer it. I can do it later. In fact, I want to do less now, but it doesn't mean I don't want to do feature 1, feature 2, feature 3. I could just do that next quarter or the quarter after that. But what's fascinating about it is rather than just killing all your darlings, which is what obviously you need to do in a product, in a kind of one-off piece, because you can't build everything, you can actually defer it. And that often meant that a feature that you knew had to be done turned out 6 months, 9 months later, you still hadn't done it because it hadn't quite made the cut. And so it killed itself.
And you realize it was not so much necessary because you lived that year with revenue and with people happy on social media and not asking so much about that feature as you thought. That happened to me, at Eden Games, when it was the first time I got into racing, and there was a lot of learning there, where some features moved from on the roadmap from 2016 to 2017 to 2018, and still haven't been done today. And it turns out having the best spectator mode in the world was not that big of a deal.
Well, don't get me wrong, it might have been great, but all the other things you had to do.
Right. as a startup as well, because that's the other thing. Not all of us are EA, not all of us are Tencent, not all of us are Roblox. So some of us have to do with 15, 20 guys and girls in the office. And then it's really about time management and prioritizing what's important for the users, not for you as an author.
Yeah, no, exactly. I spent a lot of my career in big telecoms companies or big studio, like Sony or whatever. I even spent some time with Unity. And being in big companies does provide you with quite a secure context. But there's part of me, I mean, don't get me wrong, I learned so much. I was very, very lucky in all of those places. I got to do things that almost nobody got to do. British Telecom, I got to manage my own brand with a British Telecom budget because they had found out early on that games people didn't like British Telecom. So they gave me free reign and budget at the very start of my gaming career. I got to experiment and learn really quickly. So I've got no complaints. But there's part of me that realizes that I probably should have left earlier and done the entrepreneur thing earlier because I learned so much faster outside. But, you could argue it wouldn't have happened had I not had that longer term career. So I think, everyone's got to find their own path in these things. And I think finding a space where you can see what you're passionate about, but being willing to step back and say, I don't know everything yet. And actually, I'm being continuously curious. I'm continuous. We jokingly call me the chief of curiosity. Because
you know what? Yeah. It's funny you say that because, big karma ethos or values, the first line is, we are the most curious in the room. And that's because we cannot beat The Rock at being the hardest worker in the room. I can see from his Instagram that he works harder than me. I don't hit the gym that often, but I can be more curious than him.
Curiosity, tenacity, and transparency are our values as a company. But I think that feeds very much into what you're trying to do, and what I find fascinating about what I think is really important, particularly in the current climate, for those of us who want to see a better space where there's more inclusive space, who want to be able to communicate, values that are positive about the promise of the games industry. For me, it's about inclusion. When I started out in games, gamers were nerds; they were the geeks.
Correct.
And now the geeks have inherited the earth. We have literally become, the powerhouses of many parts of the industry, of industries, not just our industry.
I grew up as a geek in the closet.
Yeah.
Because
closet geek.
Yeah, because I was talking to the nerds and exchanging floppy disks with them, but in secret. And not because I didn't want to get caught by the police or something, because I didn't want the girls to know. I didn't want the girls to know that I was playing video games, because that was putting you in a label. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I was playing games, but not telling the girls. And nowadays, the girls play games too.
Well, but they always did. They always did. That's the point. The girls always did play the games as well. Maybe not to the same extent, and there's probably more social pressure against it. But as far as my experience was, girls always played the games. I think there was never a particular issue about that. I think the thing is, we're in a situation where we have, we don't shout out enough about people who already exist in our industry, who are amazing talent. We see too many people who look like me, and not enough people who don't look like me. And I think one of the really important things as an industry is that we should be looking at every kind of diversity, because we are used by a hugely diverse audience, culturally, identity-wise, gender variations-wise, ability, social economic ability, and power, etc. There is a huge amount of range, and we have, like I say, the verb of mediums. And if we don't do something about creating a better world, if we don't do something that's meaningful, we're wasting the potential of our industry, in my opinion. And so when I see the news that we've seen recently about Activision Blizzard and Ubisoft, I get very sad. And what we need to do is find, more people, to talk about the ones who are already showing that this is an industry that can be very inclusive and can be very supportive. And listening to people who are not getting that, because we need curiosity, we need, tenacity, but we also need transparency.
Yeah.
And I think that's really missing.
And it's not just inside companies, by the way. I was talking with some friends at Red Bull, and they were telling me that in esports tournaments as well, we still have a long way to go, and diversity of the playing pool that we see on statistics from home is still not reflected at the events that are organized. You still have way too many white males.
Yeah.
Because the others might not feel welcome or might be afraid of bullying, because it happens quite simply.
It happens. And I think, there's a whole bunch of goes with that. One of my favorite charities is a group called Special Effects. I did a 10K run for them recently. Didn't raise a huge amount of money, but
Special Effects, and they're friends of Picama too.
What I love about the work that they did to help Microsoft with their accessibility controller. Because the idea of being able to create tools that mean that people with physical disabilities can play on a level playing field with anybody else. That's amazing. And there's a couple of the guys who they've helped who are professional esports people, and that's magic to me. Because that's, again, let's stop let's create a situation where we can have a conversation about the great game, not about someone's disability.
And it goes back to what we were saying earlier, what I was rambling about, when you give the turntables and then all of a sudden hip hop and rap comes about. It's the same here. It's not about charity. It's about giving a fair access and fair rules so that everybody can compete with the hardware they need, and homologating it, because it's not cheating in certain cases. And if they have the card to prove it, and then you might discover new talents and that otherwise would have been overlooked. Somebody opened my eyes about the fact that we call it inclusive design, but it should be called universal design. Because when you look for solutions for one person who might have this disability or this quirk or this flaw, you stumble upon things that are going to be useful for the rest of the world. Like, for example, when you add subtitles for the deaf and hearing impaired, you end up seeing that 32% of the people use the subtitle option, which is obviously more than the ratio of deaf in the population. So it can be people on a bus, people learning a second language, people who just like the text, whatever reasons. You just gave an option to users. Now they're going to choose it. And another example of that I come back a lot is the ramp. The ramp obviously was designed for wheelchair access, but I intuitively, if it's open, if there's room, I'm going to take the ramp over the stairs if I have both options. And 6 months ago, I stumbled upon data that shows that the ramp is better for our spine than stairs. So the ramp is better for everyone. And it was invented for wheelchair. And that to me is how entrepreneurship, creativity really works. We suddenly get obsessed about that single tiny problem, but then we discover a solution that fits many other cases.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I mean, like I say, it's difficult with this particular thing because we have, and I'll use the word privilege because that's the best word we've got right now. We have, as cis white men, able to speak English, able to have a certain level of economic power and a certain level of opportunities that we've been able to take up.
We go through borders pretty easily. We go through borders much easier than a Colombian, for example.
Absolutely. And so we've had this massive opportunity, and that doesn't take away the fact that we've worked our to ourselves and the best of our ability and taken, tried to be as positive in our community as we have. But there are lots of people who haven't had those opportunities, and I think one of the responsibilities we have is try and find ways to support people, to give them the ability to have their own voice, and to maybe sometimes I should shut up and let somebody else talk.
I have this, how to put it, this insecurity as well, because I had it a lot at the beginning of Big Karma. I was like, yeah, but I'm making a game to represent disability, and I'm talking about disability representation. I am not disabled from... people could argue that I am, but officially I have not been diagnosed. And obviously it's through my daughter, and we have athletes with disability involved in the process. We're making it with them, not just for them. But every now and then I feel the same. And I got to tell you that when it gets, nowadays it's pitches to investors and stuff like that. But when the day comes to actually in production of the game and motion capture, we're not talking publicly a lot. When we do promote the game and when we want to sell our message, it's really important to us that the athletes who are involved making the game are the ones who are going to give the interviews and talk about it. Because I think it's immensely important that it's good to be an ally, but I don't want to be stealing the spotlight, if I may be candid here.
Well, we want to normalize the conversation. That's the key word for me. And you can't normalize the conversation if we're, as much as we like the limelight, it's not always our story to tell.
But somebody reinforced me a little bit in that and told me, yes, you're right, but if you giving the spotlight to the right people in the right moment, then your allyship and you taking the reins is still very important, because you are privileged, because you are in the room, because they listen to you. And so if people like you do not speak up, then our voice don't get heard. So speak for us and then let us speak, but do not, if other people struggle with that stuff out there, do your best and don't feel guilty about everything you do either.
No, exactly. I think it's that we do have an immense amount of guilt, and I don't want to speak for somebody else, but I can say that I'm an ally, and I can say that I want to do what I can, and I can amplify the voices, and I try to amplify the voices where I can. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, that's why I like what you guys are trying to do. I think that's really, that's why it's exciting to see you, leading with a different style and approach, and trying to, bring people with physical disabilities into the game development process, as well as the concept and the background, to basically build that around sports. And,
even in the music now, we are teaming up with artists with disabilities who have incredible talent, and they've just been overlooked. Because that's what I really want to emphasize. We're not creating anything or giving anybody a pedestal. We're just acknowledging
it's an interesting story,
their merits, what was already incredible and what should have been on TV and in video games before. We were just... It's just that taboo about disability that we tend to look at it from a condescending point and with pity. And if you remove that pity lens, you suddenly see the truth for what it is.
Exactly, because we're not talking
about achievements.
But we're not talking about singling out somebody because of a disability. What we're talking about is somebody who's got an interesting story about them or an interesting experience
and is outstanding. Right.
And it's an interesting story, regardless. They happen to have a disability, and that is part of that story, and we're not hiding from that. But the fact is, there are so many people out there with interesting stories, and there's lots of different reasons for that story to be covered and discussed, and to have the story be interesting as the heart of it. I think that's really the key to it for me.
Right.
So, I mean, I should probably talk a little bit more about kind of what we're trying to do as well, just because here's an opportunity. So obviously, I'll take it. Hey, what can I say? So, like I said, I've been involved in games for such a long time, and we made a call about March this year that we've been starting to help people get themselves ready to run their games in live, and offering teams to support with this sort of creation of daily, weekly, monthly events, but also planning out their content release and feature release strategy so that you could build up a sustainable and basically get more people doing more things more often and for longer. So that strategy, you're saying, okay, so you've got the hyper casual where you're going to do lots and lots of games very quickly and then move on. We're the opposite. We want to say, okay, so we find the game that works. Let's focus on retention. And if you focus on retention, we believe, and we've seen it happen many times, that actually what you get is more value, not just for the game, but also for the players. And actually, that's the really heart of what we're interested in. That's where the curiosity and tenacity comes from, is we want to find out what works for the players. We're massively believers that it's got to be about creating a better experience. In fact, we think free-to-play should make the game better. And if it doesn't, you've done it wrong.
Yeah.
In fact, one of my measures of whether we've done a good job or not is repeat purchase. And that sounds weird. That sounds very cynical and very kind of commercial. It's not. Because if somebody purchases multiple times, it's because they liked it.
Yeah.
Now,
it's like going back to a restaurant. It's because we like the food.
Exactly. So our whole mindset is we want to be the restaurant you go to because you like the food. And you want to buy the extra plate of truffle mushrooms because it's delicious. In our case, it would be that amazing outfit or that fantastic upgrade to your weapon that you get this benefit from. But I believe in doing that in such a way that's non-linear. So when you make a purchase, it's not just a pay-to-win thing, because that's desire. In fact, I don't even believe in pay-to-win. Pay-to-win for me is...
Pay-to-win is a crutch.
Well, it's a broken game.
Pay-to-win is a crutch for a disabled game.
Yeah. Even that.
But it's not a leg. It's not a prosthetic.
It's not helpful. It slows people up. Completely get you. I was going the other way, which is basically busted the game. But I do think you're right. There's something about the metaphor of a crutch where it's like, have you actually helped them? Anyway, maybe.
Yeah, Dimitar, the reason why I came up with the crutch is because I've been working with Dimitar Dragunov. He also wrote a book, but his book is freemium monetization. And his view, first of all, he completely agrees with you that his first focus is retention.
Yeah.
If he has built the retention, now we can start monetize long term, and now we're in a good spot. If we don't have retention, we have a flawed game. Yes. Now, he's a monetization guy. He's not... he cannot, if you bring him a completely flawed game because of the core gameplay or whatever, he might not be able to fix it for you if you come to him too late.
Exactly.
But he still has a job to do sometimes because he worked at big companies with big portfolios. And that's how he explained to me. He said, look, sometimes I can fix the game and find what's wrong, and then we're thriving. Sometimes what's wrong is beyond fixing. And then I can just use tricks and crutches that I know will somehow get the budget back, but it's not going to make a hit. It's just about saving and recouping investments now and playing defense. And when he fixes the game, I find like he's doing the prosthetic and it works. And now that's it. It's elegant and it's running.
No, exactly.
And I like that metaphor, especially coming from a monetization guy, because he's the one doing it.
Especially for you, where you're working on games that are focused on communicating issues about disability. In that particular example, I thoroughly, get it. I mean, I spent a lot of my career basically people coming to me asking me to fix their game, which is broken, and 90% of the time, the first thing, in fact, the main thing that needs to be fixed, is the first-time user experience. It's not the monetization most of the time. There is often bits in monetization, but generally it's about understanding how people flow in the game and getting that retention. So I mean, that's one of the advantages that I think we're trying to pull together is, so obviously we've got this KPI-led approach. So we look at games, we say what we like about them, we come up with, we tell the developers what we think is needed to get to live, the smallest possible, to deliver I know it's a bit kind of funny, but I love minimum viable products as a principle. As a the Lean Startup, great book. Lots of really interesting stuff that comes from it. But for a living game, we've got to go a little bit further. We need a minimum viable promise. And the reason I'm using
viable what? Sorry.
Minimum viable promise.
Okay.
Because the game itself has to be working, sustainable, viable, but tell you what, or imply, foreshadow that more is coming if only you keep playing.
Yes.
So without the promise, you don't have a service. You need to tease ongoing possibilities.
Correct.
So that to me is the difference between an experience, a game, one-off game, and a service. It's that ongoing sense of momentum.
You have to convince the person to grind his way into the game, because there is something aspirational coming, and you always need to give him a taste of it. I compare this with Hollywood, the hook, the hook, first act, second act, third act. The hook is that, I always use that example. The hook is the head of Danny Trejo on a turtle, and it's been cut. And you see that at the beginning of a Breaking Bad episode, and you have no clue why. Move on to first act, and now we build to that moment of how did that happen, that moment I just saw. And you need to do that in a mobile game.
You do. And I often use the example of the TV show Columbo. So the reason I love Columbo is because it does the opposite of what you just described. Well, kind of. You see the murderer killing.
Yeah, you know who did it.
Yeah. You know who did it.
You are an advantage against Columbo.
Yeah. Why would you watch a whodunit when you know who did it?
All right.
And the answer is because you're not watching the murderer, you're watching the detective. And actually what you're doing is you're watching everything this idiot, this buffoon of a detective does, because 5 minutes before the end of the show, he's going to say just one more thing to the murderer. And that's when he will explain not just who did it, but how he solved it. And your game, because watching TV show Columbo is a game, you're trying to work out which of the silly little things he does is the reason he managed to solve it. And you want to guess that before it finishes. What's fascinating is that it means that the producers put in random stuff in the background, and people assume as they're going through the show, is it that? Is it that? Is it the dropped cigarette stubs? And people come up with their own hypothesis. And then at the end, when they find out they're either right, fantastic, they feel great because they were right, or they were wrong. And they go, fantastic, I found something else I missed. That is, to me, the spirit of what makes a great tease, a great promise, because you have this predictable surprise.
Yes, it's almost like Cluedo, the TV show.
Yeah, it is. It is. Creating this predictable surprise is really, for me, the heart and soul of live ops, and getting people to be part of it, this community of it. So that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to help bring all these kind of years of experience of watching what makes long-term game experiences work, helping developers who've not done that before, or even those who have, but maybe not. Very few developers have the resources to do it themselves anymore.
Yeah, and it's also sometimes a change of mindset, a change of process, and it's live, as the word says, live ops. So your mistakes are seen by a lot of people and have direct consequences of your bottom line. So you might as well do it with a partner who know how to hold your hand.
You're holding a promise.
Your job is to surprise. At Angry Birds, on the marketing department door, it was written surprise and delight. That was their job, of surprise and delight. And another fantastic example of live ops gone right is Best Fiends in my back. You see the poster. Totally. So you have the launch poster, you have the Christmas poster, you have the Chinese New Year poster. All these were live ops event. And what seriously really built better than any other mobile company I've served for so far was the osmosis between their product development team and their marketing team. As you know, in many companies, you have the product team saying, we're going to do this. And then they give it to the marketing team who say, we're going to sell it like this. But seriously, it was really like, okay, in 3 months, we have this Easter update. Let's make it that the YouTube stars are going to have their logo hidden in the garden like eggs, but then the YouTube stars are going to come out and give the clue for their thing. When you find all the 13, and the brainstorming, there was excitement, there was enthusiasm, there were the defense and the offense of a same sports team and respecting each other's skills. And I found that so refreshing, and more importantly, it's such a key to their success that it's encouragement for the others to find that magic too.
But I'd go a little bit further, because seriously, you were one of the first teams to actually integrate YouTubers into the experience. You're the first team to cut content creations as part of mobile.
Credit to Phil Hickey to that. Phil Hickey to that. Back then, one of his podcast interviews on another show is really a good story of that. Back then, he basically looked at it as Phil Hickey is an ex-basketball professional. And so he has.
I didn't know that. He's very tall.
Yes, he is the white shack. But he played professional, and so he has that sports mindset, which is, how do we win? Which I find a super great question in marketing. How do we win? That strategy to get a few users on a positive return on investment is great, but how do we win? How do we take? And his view was, you know what? Everybody's on Facebook. All of them have more money than us. And they have established IP, and we're new. So we're not going to win if we go face to face with them on their turf.
Yeah.
And as he was asking people around, all the CMOs were telling him, we can't figure out YouTube. So he thought, all right, if they can't figure out YouTube, let's go on YouTube, because we're going to be alone. And that's when I told him, take me with you, because I too had seen that, up until 2011, blog marketing was a key pillar of my marketing. And then it stopped working. And I was looking for the new thing that would be cheaper than just buying users from Facebook and whatnot, and iResource and Ad Colony. And YouTube felt like the next frontier, but the problem was you had to go big or go home. And Phil Hickey is the first one who convinced his CEO, Andrew Stalbow, to do go big or go home.
And I also remember,
and then it worked, and they doubled down and doubled down and doubled down, and I learned so much with them. And when everybody flocked to influencer marketing, I was lucky to be on LinkedIn as a consultant, and I did it for a lot of other companies. But credits to Phil Hickey, at the time, it was visionary what he did.
I mean, that team was really influential, in my opinion, not only because they had that legacy of Robbie, but also. So I don't know if you know, when I was at Unity, I was the apprentice for Unity Ads, but we were obviously pretty close to the team at the time, seriously, and they put in a new mechanism at the time, which was watch an ad to get to have another go at the daily reward. Right. And we all thought, great, fantastic, that'll be money, won't it? And it was money, but that wasn't the biggest interesting thing. They had I think it was 2.5 times the session length as a result of putting it in there. And that had knock-on effects in revenue as well. So if you think about this principle I was saying about more players doing more things more often and for longer, that is a classic example where we got to learn, because of the innovation of a game developer using ads in a smart way, how you got them to want to play longer. And that is, to me, gold dust. That's gold dust, not just because it's about more money. Yes, more money is great. It's also that players were enjoying the game.
It's the psychology of it. Yeah, it's the psychology of it. Which, by the way, Phil Hickey is really good at. He's really great at user psychology, and the way he designed the profile of the best Fiends users is still a great learning experience. And he thinks different too, because not only did he take over YouTube, but at some point when he realized that I'm not sure if you know that, but Best Fiends is 60% skewed toward female users. So at some point he had to go and find and he realized, oh, terrestrial radio is listened to a lot by soccer moms at home in the Midwest. And there is little competition because it's not digital, and the price, and they got hundreds of thousands of installs for very, very cheap ECPI for doing terrestrial radio at the moment everybody else was doing podcasts.
Amazing. I agree. He's a very smart guy, and it's just amazing.
And you got to come on the show, Phil, because we know we praised you. You're the next guest.
Yeah, we buttered him up enough.
All right, my friend.
Cool.
I'm gonna let you enjoy your Friday evening and your weekend.
Thank you very much.
If that's the thing in your life. Because live ops, that's the problem. We're like doctors in the past with the beepers. Somebody needs surgery, sir.
Well, hopefully you plan it so you don't need to worry too much about that. But yes, that's
let's pretend we are that good. All right, my friend. It was great to have you, as always.
Lovely chatting to
you. Thank you so much for coming. Everybody at home listening to us, remember patreon.com/bigkarma if you want to help our community or join our community or see exclusive stuff. And may karma be with you, Oscar.
and with you.
Oh, you did. Oh, damn. I've been trying that sign for so many years.
I'm a true Trekkie.
I'm a Star Wars guy. Let's go to it.
Has to be done. Lovely chat to you, sir, and I'll see you soon.